Happy New Year, Marie.
Happy New Year, Jodi. Have you made loads of resolutions?
I'm not a resolution type person, are you?
Oh gosh, yeah. Yeah, I always make loads. And then I think, I probably said this last year, whenever it gets to a new year, like a Chinese New Year, I redo them.
So what we need is a new year every month.
Yeah, I think so. So you review your resolutions and chuck out the ones that aren't serving you and make some new ones. It's the way I work.
It's your own time you're wasting. So why not stick the kettle on, put your feet up and have a cuppa? Ah, bliss.
Today we have a wonderful guest, my very, very good friend Sophie. She works in a children's home in the south of England and has worked with loads of different children in the care system. Hi Sophie.
Hi.
Hello, welcome. Thanks for coming on.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Sophie also comes with an added bonus guest of her little baby.
Yeah, he's supposed to be sleeping, but he's refusing.
So yeah, you may hear sounds of baby.
You may get aggressive raspberries at any moment.
So, tell us a little bit about yourself. How did you end up working in the care system?
So I've worked with kids in different capacities for the last 7 or maybe 8 years now, which makes me feel old. I started off working with children just after I finished uni. I was doing criminology and my plan was always to work with young offenders, which somewhere along the line turned into working with looked after children, which is what I've kind of focused on for the last few years. So that's me really.
So you've worked with children in children's homes.
Yes.
What typically is the reason a child would be in a children's home?
One of the biggest sort of misconceptions about children's homes at the moment is that they are a last resort. I think maybe that was the case a few years ago, I'd say. But as the system has changed and across the board, there is a national shortage of foster families, foster homes. So children's homes are being used a lot more widely and becoming much more of a first resort. So I think, the dynamic of children's homes has definitely changed over the years.
Do you think this is better or worse for children that there aren't any foster carers?
I think it's worse. I think it is worse. But I think where there's been such a shift in the need for children's homes, the way that children's homes are run is being completely sort of reshuffled as well. So it's led to a much better standard of children's homes. So like, for example, in ours, we're in our area, we're at the forefront of, they call it the loving care ethics or model, which is basically trying to de-institutionalise children's homes as much as possible for the children. So it's a much different experience now as it was even a few years ago. So for example, like just the change in the language has been a big thing. So like we're not staff anymore, we're adults. The children aren't service users anymore, they're children and young people. Because it's crazy. Service user as the name of a child is just crazy to me. No. So there's been a big change in the way that things are running at the moment. But I do think in most cases children would benefit more from being in a foster home. But then there are some cases where children are better off in a group home. You know, there's more adults, it's less concentrated. Some kids really benefit from that. So I think there's different circumstances these days.
How does it differ from kind of the children's homes of our parents and our grandparents' era? Because your grandma used to work in a children's home.
That's true, yeah.
That was bizarre when you think about it.
I think one of the biggest differences is the number of children and young people that you can have in the home. So now it's much more focused on much smaller homes. So in my home, there's 6 children, and in our 2 sister homes, there's 5 and 6 children. Whereas before, it could be, well up into the teens or even more, which is just mad. But now it's a lot more focused on the child's needs and actually what they need to succeed in life, and about setting them up in a way that a family would, rather than in a way that, say, for example, a school would, or, another institution. It's more about trying to recreate now as much as we can, because we understand there is limitations and it's, it's never going to be a family home. But as much as we can, we try and make that the focus.
So you mentioned schools there. As a children's home, do you work closely with the schools to make sure they're getting that wraparound care?
We do, but in my experience, that's one of the biggest challenges, I would say, in my role, because it's my job to be the voice of the child, and I think that's something it is really difficult to be an advocate for a child in schools, because in my experience, I know it's probably not the same across the board, but schools are quite rigid and quite set on what their definition of a good student is and what they think a child needs, and the things that they think they know aren't necessarily the things that we know to work. And I think my biggest challenge is being the advocate, and I'm fighting the professionals on things that they are set in their ways about. And in my experience, a lot of our children are in like alternative educational provisions rather than mainstream school, because for one reason or another the mainstream school hasn't worked out for them. So one of my children he's got a whole different curriculum, so he's doing various like outdoor education and more of a focus on sports and things like that, whereas he really wants to be in mainstream school, but the mainstream school has decided that he's not suitable for their placement, which is really difficult.
So what can teachers do better to support, and schools do better to support?
I think the biggest thing would be to have patience and a bit more of an understanding of the differences in like the challenges that these kids face. I think to marginalise and to isolate a child from school, although that might be what's best for the school and possibly the other students on a whole, it's never what's best for the child, for our children in particular. I think that's the biggest thing, and as well it's to shift the mentality. I think, because there is still a lot of stigma around looked after children and children's homes, and there's a lot of things that are still not necessarily accurate in today's world, and I think it paints our kids in quite a bad light compared to how I think they should be recognised.
And apart from school,
Sure.
what are some of the other challenges that children in care face?
I think the biggest thing in my experience is the isolation. I think that's a massive thing. They feel our kids really struggle to make friends. I think a big part of that is the school as well, because if they're not in mainstream school, they're not getting the same opportunities, and they're in smaller classes, and there's not the same experience at all, and they really struggle, I think, socially because of these challenges. And I think it's a lot of the time they're held to the same standard as a child who's grown up in their family home. And I think that sets them up to fail. I don't think that's a fair way of dealing with a looked after child. I think you have to make exceptions. And you have to understand that their circumstances are entirely different.
I had a young man in my form who he wasn't a looked after child, but if he had been any younger he would have been. He was nearly 16, so they were trying to maintain him in the home.
Right.
But his mother was struggling with drug abuse and addiction, and he had struggled with addiction, and he used to come in full uniform but having not done his homework. And I used to be, the fact that he's made it to school in his
so
uniform
much.
Like he's organised enough to do that. The fact that he's not done his homework, I'm not going to punish that, because he's done so much more
That's exactly
than
it.
everyone else has had to just to get to this point.
And I understand that there is there's a call for equality, and everybody wants everybody to be treated the same. But I think you can't ignore what a child is coming into school from, like where they're coming from, because I think it's such a massive part of the fact that kid had even made it into that.
Yeah, exactly.
On that day is huge, and to be in uniform, those are massive things that are not easy, and they face completely different set of challenges every day that shouldn't be ignored. They can't be ignored.
And equality really shouldn't mean everybody's treated the same. It should mean everybody gets the support they need to reach the same level.
There's that excellent
absolutely.
image, isn't there, about, and I can't remember the two words that they use, but like one of them is a picture of a shorter person and a tall person trying to look over a fence.
Yeah.
And then the other one, the shorter one, has got
Equity and equality.
Yes. And we talk a lot about privilege and stuff, and everyone as adults is encouraged to be aware of their privilege, but I guess it's kind of about teachers being aware of the lack of privilege and that actually getting to school in your uniform, having done your homework, that's a privilege.
But then also it's the juggle of, sorry, the raspberries will come out eventually. It's the juggle of not making that child feel different. That's the challenge as well, I think, which is equally important. Not calling them out and congratulating them for being in uniform, or it's to try and manage it in a way that's subtle, because a lot of these, they don't want to ever admit that they're different, or that they're facing these challenges. That's the last thing they want to do, is bring attention to it. So it's about trying to find a way that works to do both, which is it's not an easy thing, but
What's on your mind? Let us know your thoughts, ideas and anecdotes. Drop us a line at beyondmailbag@twinkle.co.uk.
So, overall, do you think the care system is working well? I mean, we hear lots of horror stories, but there must be positive aspects as well.
I think the shift in the way that the system is working has been massive, and I think in homes such as my own, it's really evident in the way that our kids talk about us, and the relationship we have with our kids is very much, like we're friends, or like, we're people that they trust because they want to trust us, not because they're forced to. And I think there definitely is a shift in the right direction. I don't know, I would never say we're there. I don't think we should ever stop working on it.
No.
But I think it's definitely going in the right direction. For example, one of our young people recently was given the opportunity to do a radio interview with the BBC.
Oh, wow.
And they were very excited because the piece was basically on the fact that there are no foster families at the moment, or there's very limited foster families. So our child went on and was saying, but they have had a really, really positive, they're 16, they've had a hugely positive experience living in a children's home, and that they would consider that their forever family, because the post was about that these kids don't get forever families and how sad that is, and they were saying, oh, well, hold on a minute, I found my forever family in my children's home. And that was beautiful, but I just think that really shows
Such an achievement.
It was huge. We were all sobbing.
I bet you were.
And we were so immensely proud of the work we're doing, because I think if, like, for example, in my grandma's era, like, not one of those children would ever be able to say that honestly about the places they were living.
It was definitely an institution in those days.
Yeah. And so I think, there's a big step in the right direction. And I think if we keep going how we're doing, then there's definitely hope for the future. But just as much as there needs to be a call for foster families as well, because it's we're all working for the same cause, and it's all with the child at heart. And I think that's the thing we need to remember.
Are there restrictions on who can become a foster parent, or is it open to?
I think within reason it's open. It seems to be, for some reason, it's just there's a huge problem at the moment where there's just not enough. I think the problem as well is that the number of children in care is always growing. Which was it's never matching up, and the ratio is just so like wildly disproportionate that it's just it's a growing problem.
I think we're seeing this in a lot of areas, aren't we? It's the same with SEND. Demand is high, but resources are low.
Exactly.
And funding is low.
Well, that's exactly the problem as well. I think the amount that you make from being a foster parent is not enough. It's not. It's not the equivalent of a full-time job.
Because that was the original idea, wasn't it? Is your job would be caring. Because caring for a child is obviously difficult and takes a lot of time.
Absolutely.
But caring for a child with that kind of background and trauma is so much more.
And I think it is across the board. It's a difficult time.
How did COVID affect children in care?
So in my experience, I think it just pushed these kids further into isolation. I think with schools being shut down and all the restrictions that were in place, it's had a massive hit, as it's had on most young people, or all young people, I think it's fair to say. I think it definitely was exacerbated, definitely, for the kids in care, because they are that much more isolated, and they're that much more far away from the mainstream.
And do you think that's going to have a long-lasting effect?
I think so, yeah. I think these kids really struggle socially. They don't know how to make friends in the same way. you know, as most kids and young people these days, everything's online.
Yeah.
You know, like the social side, everything's online, but they've struggled to maintain friendships in the same way. And I think COVID's had a huge impact on that as well.
Is there a particular age of the people you find the young people in care homes, or is it more older, more younger,
So our youngest in my home at the moment is 13, but he came in when he was 11, and that's quite young. But recently, so we've had another in our sister home. They've had a brother and sister, and the youngest is 8.
Oh.
And that's really little.
Yeah.
Because usually those children would be going to foster parents.
But there's just not enough.
But there's just not enough out there, and especially for siblings. And in this situation, we were lucky that we were able to keep these siblings together, because that's not the norm, but that's something we really fought for, because usually they wouldn't take a child that young. But that's something we tried hard to do.
You're making me want to go out and sign up as a foster mum.
I know, and I think, you know, if there is anything anyone can do, then it's just look into it, do the research, see what you can do to support, because it's needed. It's needed across nationwide. It's needed.
So, if I'm a teacher and someone walks into my classroom and they're a looked after child, I'm given very minimal information about why and their background. What can I do to support them without making them stand out?
Yeah, it is difficult, and it's a difficult thing to juggle. I think the biggest thing is to be aware of them. Don't let them sort of slip through the cracks.
Yeah.
I think a lot of the young people I've worked with are very good at keeping themselves to themselves and, you know, just getting on with things.
Yeah.
Doesn't necessarily mean that that's what works, but that's what they're good at. I think be aware of, like, who they're hanging out with socially, I think is really important. What sort of friendships have they got? Is there any way that you can help support positive friendships? Or you know, encouraging extracurricular stuff. Sport is a massive thing. Drama, a massive thing. Music, like, and try and encourage different outlets, I think, is a huge thing you can do to support. Yeah. And be aware of their situation as much as you can, and hopefully whoever's their carer or whatever place they're living in should try and have some sort of working relationship with the school, because it's a very important thing to have that bridge for the young person to feel like they're being supported across the board. So I think as far as is appropriate for the teacher, I think try and get involved, try and find out what kind of place they're living in, you know. But yeah, a big thing, like, nurse their interests. They're interested in art, amazing. Like, let's talk about artists. You like sport, brilliant. There's this club you can sign up for. Just try and be their consistent person as much as you can.
And I guess that's something you can do as a form teacher, and it's harder to do as a classroom teacher.
Of course.
But like, I know I had a child who was looked after, well, who's adopted, but was still very involved with social services. And just kind of that daily check-in on how you're doing, and you know,
and not even to be up in their face about it, but just give them the opportunity of, like, I'm here, by the way, you know, like. And I think consistency is a massive thing as well, because a lot of these kids have been through hugely challenging things where they've never had any consistency. And if there's any opportunity for you to be that consistent person, then do it. Even if they're telling you to go away or they don't want you near them, fine. Try again the next day, you know. Just keep showing up for them.
Yeah, I agree. Sometimes they say these things, but they don't mean them, do they?
Absolutely. Yeah. They're going to push you away because that's what's worked for them.
They're sort of testing.
Exactly.
Will you come back if I push you away?
Exactly, and that's what's worked. That's what's kept them safe, and that's why they do these things. But it's about, showing up the next day, you know, and the next day, and the next day, and the next day. As much as you can,
And being the adult and understanding they're the child and understanding their difficulties,
Exactly. And that's a big thing that I've come across in my challenges with working with schools, is that they're not as quick to be understanding. You know, they'll see the behaviour as surface level, and, you know, they're aggressive, or they've been rude, or they're shouting or anything like that, and then they just write that kid off as being rude or aggressive, or, you know, being unpleasant or unkind. But I just think that's where teachers need to have more patience and more understanding. And maybe if there was more of a, like, broad understanding of what it's like for these kids and the things that they've been through. Like, there's amazing training opportunities out there, and I've been part of some where it's adults that have grown up in care and come back, and they do talks for teachers, and there's amazing training out there, and it just gives them, you know, an insight into this is what it was like, and this is what I needed, and this is what could have been better.
Yeah.
I think it's really valuable, really valuable. You can never learn enough.
Yeah. So, give us a really positive story from your career.
I think one of my favourite success stories, if you will, is a girl I used to work with, and I knew her when she was late teens, so she'd already been in care for her whole life. But when I was working with her, she was a lot older, which is a lot older than what we're used to.
Yeah.
But something happened with her when she changed her life around. I don't even know what it was, but something happened, and then she suddenly decided she was going to go back to college. Wow. And it was just a huge turnaround for her because she'd come from all these things. And then one day she's very recently told us that she's been accepted into uni to study medicine.
Oh my gosh!
And it was just huge. Yeah.
Wow, that's massive.
It was just massive.
It's your own time you're wasting. Ramblings from Beyond the Classroom with Marie and Jodi. There's not a lot they don't know about teaching.
It's so lovely to have you, Sophie. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I feel like I can talk for hours. So just, thank you for giving us the space.
It's obviously something you're really passionate about, which is great.
I think we can take a lot away from that, do you not, Jodi?
That's it.
Yeah, and I think at the end of the day, it's about going in with compassion. If you go in with compassion and try and understand, understand, because that's probably a lost cause, but empathise and do your best to kind of, understand that you don't get it, I guess. But yeah. And thank you guys for joining us as our audience. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and remember that we have now moved to monthly, so we will see you in 1 month.
And if you want to get in touch with us on
beyondmailbag@twinkle.co.uk. Remember, no E on Twinkle.
Good. Right. Thank you, everyone, and we'll see you next month.
Thank you.
This podcast is proudly produced by Beyond. Please bear in mind the views and opinions expressed are those of individuals and may not represent those of Beyond or Twinkle.